We're now on Daf Gimel Amid Beis on the top of the Yom. The Afhu, and even Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Pasach v'Darash, he opened up a drasha based on Koheles Perek Yud Beis, Divrei Chachamim Kedarvanos, Kemasmeros, Nituim, Baalei Asufos, Nitnu Miroa Echad, a very complicated pasuk in Koheles. And instead of trying to translate the pasuk, what we'll do is we'll darshan based on Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah each one of the phrases in this pasuk. Now, first of all, Divrei Chachamim, that is an allusion to the study of Torah. V'lama nivshlu Divrei Torah lidarvan. Darvan, of course, is the singular of darvanos. What is a darvan? Darvan is a metal pole that's very sharp, and you use it to encourage the animal, so to speak, by poking it while it's threshing. And during the Harisha period, in order to make sure that the animal, the ox, is going in the right direction, you use a darvan. So it sets the animal on the right path. And what's the mashal between the darvan and Torah? Lomar Lecha, this teaches us ma darvan ze mechaven esapora lislameha, right? The furrows, so you get the cow or the ox to go down the right path. And what's the ultimate goal? Lahotzi chayim laolam. Let's say as a result of the harisha, you're able to plant, you're able to produce, and you bring life to the world, sustenance to the world. Af divrei Torah mechavnin eslom deim midarche misa ledarche chayim, so that the Torah will direct a person and guide him on the path of life, not on the path of death. And we're talking on a spiritual level, of course. But now the question is, do we take this analogy between Torah and the Dravan to its logical conclusion? Ima Dravan ze metaltel. This Dravan is moved around from place to place. It's not permanently located or situated in any location. Is af divrei Torah metaltelin? Shall we say that divrei Torah are also shaking around, going from place to place? They have no permanence. They have no kiyum, chas v'sholom li'olam. Talmud lomar, therefore the pasuk compares it to masmeros. And masmeros are kvuim v'kaimim li'olam. A masmer is takua, it's mamish, pierced in its place, set in its location on a permanent basis. And that is the nature of Torah, that Torah is makayim in the permanent way. But wait a minute, if you're going to take the analogy to a masmer, is ma masmer zechaser v'lo yoseh? When you use the masmer, you get nothing out of it. What you do get is a hole. You punch a hole in something. So if anything, it's chaser, it's not yeseh. Is therefore, shall I assume that after a Torah chaserim v'lo yiserim? In other words, a person who's dedicated to Torah study, he doesn't have the time to put into earning a living, and therefore he's going to make a big hole in his bank account because he's going to be eating up his funds on a regular basis, depleting, as it were, his financial assets. Talmud lomar nituim. The pasuk deliberately added the word nituim, planted. Divrei Torah are like a sapling that you plant in the ground. Manetiyazu paravarov. After you plant something in the ground, it becomes a source for sustenance. It flourishes, it grows, it multiplies. And so too, after Divrei Torah, parin v'ravin. There's a bracha in Divrei Torah. And when you are marba, when you add and increase your asek HaTorah, your dedication to Torah study, then instead of losing chas v'sholom, instead of being chaser, it's going to be matzliach. It's going to be parim v'ravin. there's going to be flourish. It's going to flourish. And it means divrei Torah atzmam shalom dim shalom deo mevinim davar mitoch davar umechadshim chidush. Imagine you start with a small section, like the Rama Hilchas Talmud Torah, a couple of pages, and then you can fill up a whole library on all the commentaries. That's the way Torah is. It's para v'rava. And then the pasuk says, Bale Asufos. This is, I think, the most important and exciting part of this whole drasha of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. What are these Asufos? Asufos means assemblies or gatherings of people. Af elu talmidei chacham sheyoshvim asufos asufos. You have various groups of talmidei chacham. You have the Beit Shammai group and the Beis Hillel group. The Oskim at Torah, they're studying Torah, and they give rulings. There are conclusions and normative halachas that derive from each one of the studies of respectively each group. And halolu mitamim. This group came to the conclusion that it's tamim. Halolu mitarim, they disagree and it's tar. Halolu osrim, halolu matirim, halolu poslim, halolu machshirin. And we're confused, are we not? Dover vifucho, it's either tamei or tar, it's either mutar rasa, it's either chayav or potter, it's either kosher or posel. Ishem yomer adam heichani lomei Torah me'ata. Am I supposed to be Torah? I don't know, which of the opinions is the correct one. So where is the emissary? I'll be totally confused. Almud Lomar, and that's why the pasuk says Kulam Nitnu Miroa Echad. This is the end of the pasuk. So we've already gotten to the point of Bali Asufos. But Bali Asufos led us to a very confusing conclusion. We don't know where to go. Maybe we should start learning instead of confusing ourselves. We don't know how to finally come to any conclusion. And therefore, Talmud Lomar Kulam Nitnu Miroa Echad. What does that mean? Nitnu Miroa Echad. They were all given by one shepherd. So it means even though there are contradictions here and opposite conclusions, real dissension, but nevertheless, it's coming from one source, from the Ribono Shel Olam, from Roa Echad, one shepherd. Kel Echad Nesana, one deity, one God gave all these opinions that are contradictory. And each opinion will bring a riot to support its position. And those riots come from the Torah itself. The Torah itself lends itself to two interpretations. A fantastic idea. And Parnas Echad Amoran. Parnas Echad is a reference to Moshe Rabbeinu. He gave the basis for all these different opinions, and he quoted the different opinions. So no one in these debates is quoting any sources from any other Navi or so-called text other than Moshe Rabbeinu himself. So you may have Nevi'im that will disagree with Moshe, but that's not the source and the basis for any of these opinions in the contention in the machlokas. Mipi Adon Kol Hamasim Baruch Hu. Moshe himself gave the Torah from the mouth of the Creator. Tichsiv, as it says in Maimer Asina V'Daber Elokim is Kol Advar Meila. And what is Kol Advar Meila? Coming to be Marbeh. All places where the machlokas, both deos, come from Hashem. Es Kol Advar Meila. The Ran in his Drushos embellishes this, expands on it. He says, "V'chein matzinu be'erevin l'gad machlok speisel beit Shammai yotza basko v'yomra elu v'elu divrei kim chayim." And what that means is that Kol HaTorah nitnu Moshe v'chlal zeh kol hamachlokos v'chilukei asfaros sheyesh bein chachmei Yisrael uleficha kulam Torah mishamayim. Any debate, any division of two opinions, both reflecting a svara. So respectively, these are svaras of Chachmei Yisrael. It's all Torah min hashamayim. As far as Achral L'maisa is concerned, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave the Torah so that we would find a toelis shetachriya halacha al pi das rov hachachama al pi das chachmei ador. And finally, the Brisa adds that since everyone is libam l'shamayim, they all have kavanah to interpret divrei Torah. If ha'afatah say oznecha ka'afarcheses. Afarcheses is a funnel, so it's wider on the top, narrow on the bottom. Meaning, listen carefully, open up the top of your ears like the top of a funnel, and listen to all the opinions. Uknei rav mevin lishmo es divrei metamim ves divrei metarim, and acquire for yourself a heart that understands and can hear the opposite opinions here of divrei metamim, divrei ametarim, es divrei osrim, es divrei matirim, es divrei polslim, es divrei machshirim. Open your mind to both opinions in Isa v'Heter and in Psul and Machshir. And after you learn and study and know all the opinions, you'll be able, Rashi says here about 7 lines down from the top of the Amud, but now you're in stage number 1. You should be studying Divrei Amatirim, Divrei Osrim, Divrei Posel, Divrei Aktirim, and later on down the line, perhaps we can hope that Teda Lahavchin Eze Nochon Yosef. It might be a trip, a journey. It's not bang, not so quick. The Lashon Hazeh Omer Lahem, Rabbi Yeshua said to them, Ein Dar Yasal. You know, a dar needs a father, a leader, like Elisha calls Eliyahu's Rebbe Avi Avi. And this, you might think, is a dar Yasal. But says Rabbi Yeshua, it's not a dar Yasal. Why? Because Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah Shari B'toch. He's here. And, you know, this Gemara really gives Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah a high profile. You know, he's really up there on the neon lights. He's Shari B'tocho. It's not a Dar Yosef because he's Shari B'tocho. He is here, and he's part of this generation. We was Zocha to have him alive in our generation. But a Dar Nebuch that has no Rebbe, no Rav, to teach Torah, to guide him, that's a Dar Yosel. So the Gemara now says that the Gemara's kasha here is the following. Back on Amud Aleph, we said that when Rabbi Yeshua had asked these two great scholars, Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka and Rabbi Lazar Chasma, to share Torah with them, they backed off. They weren't eager to share Torah with them. When Rabbi Yeshua raised the question, Man is chadish bebeis hamedrash, why didn't they tell him immediately their Torah? Why did they need to refuse at the first stage and say, Talmidecha anu, we are your students? And the Gemara says that the reason why they refused initially is Mishum Masechet, for the following reason. And now we're going to get into a story about Rabbi Yossi ben Durmiskis, who answered and responded to Rabbi Eliezer when Rabbi Eliezer asked him, Man is chadish bebeis hamedrash, and as a result of Rabbi Yossi's response, it created a kpeda, as we'll soon see. Now, the two scholars, Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka and Rabbi Lazar ben Chasma, were nervous because of that story of Rabbi Yossi, who gave an answer to Rabbi Eliezer, and that caused a whole kpeda. We need to learn right now the halach of hafrashas maser b'shvius be'eretz Amon u'Moav. So let's mention that in the Seder Trumas HaMaisos, there are four primary obligations. One is Truma Gedola, given to the Kohen, Meiser Rishon, given to Levi, Meiser Oni, to the Aniyim, and Meiser Sheni, which is eaten by the Bailim in Yerushalayim. Meiser Oni and Meiser Sheni do not overlap. And what that means is that on the first and second, fourth and fifth years of the Shemitah cycle, there is Meiser Sheni, but on years 3 and 6 of the Shemitah cycle, Meiser Ani replaces Meiser Sheni, and there's only one. Now, according to the Torah, there's no chiyuv Trumas HaMaisos outside of Eretz Yisrael, but the Chachamim established what's called the Artzos Hasmuchos, or the Artzos Shemisaviv LeEretz Yisrael, the outlying contiguous nations or countries, and they established Shemitah and Trumos of Maisros. Now again, let's keep in mind that we should distinguish fundamentally between Trumas and Maisros on the one hand and Shvius on the other hand. When we say that Artzos Hasmuchos Midrabanan Achai v'Trumas and Maisros, that doesn't mean that Shemitah applies and that the payrolls that grow in those areas on the seventh year are hefker. And therefore comes out that even though it's Shemitah, it's not hefker, and therefore it's chayiv in Trumas and Maisros. Now again, on a Torah level, there's no source whatsoever that if they were mafresh in a particular year, Meiser Sheni, or another particular year, Meiser Ani, that the Chachamim or the Nevi'im perhaps in Bavel would be mafresh according to this takana, the Nevi'im in Bavel, they'd be mafresh Meiser Sheni, the Anshe Knesset Gdola in Mitzrayim, were Masechet Meiser Ani. But as far as Eretz Amon u'Moav, that's Machlokas Tanoim in Masechet Yodayim. According to Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Yoshua, we equate the halacha of Eretz Amon u'Moav to that of Mitzrayim, and therefore we're mafresh Meiser Ani. And according to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, we compare it to Bavel, and we're mafresh Meiser Sheni. So the Brisa now is going to bring Rabbi Yossi ben Durmiskis and his testimony in front of Rabbi Eliezer, and how we are machriya the halacha l'maisa in this context. The Sanya, we learned in the Brisa. Maisa Rabbi Yossi ben Durmiskis shaholach lahagbil Pnei Rabbi Eliezer Belot. So the Talmud goes to his Rebbe, Rabbi Eliezer, in this case, in Lot. Amalo, Rabbi Eliezer says to him, tell me something that you learned today, something new. Amale, Rabbi Yosef responds, Nimnu v'gamru amonumov mi'aser meiser ani b'shvius. That the Chachamim stood up, they took a vote, and based on that vote, they issued a new edict. They paskined based on Rov that Bnei Yisrael, who live on the other side of the Jordan, in the land of Era Ammon and Moab, which is not sanctified with the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael, there is no Shemitah. And now, if there's no Shemitah in Ammon and Moab, for the Bnei Eretz Yisrael who are living Me'aver HaYarden in Ammon and Moab, then they'll be Chayv and Meiser. Let's take, for example, Meiser Ani, Bashvius, but not Meiser Sheni, only Meiser Ani. So we'll try to understand the difference between the two as we go along. Now, Rabbi Eliezer hears this halach and he gets all upset about it. He's makpid that Rabbi Yossi said something as if it were a chidush. And he gives cover to the one who is doresh it, as if there was a new chiddush in the Beis HaMedrash. Again, that was his Kabbalah. That's what he had received in transmission from the time of Anshe Knesset Gdolah. Amar lo, Rabbi Eliezer turns to Rabbi Yossi. He says to him, Yossi, pshot yodecha v'kabel einecha. This is unbelievable. This was a gzeira that he should lose his eyesight. Poshat Yossi Yodov v'kibel einov. And he became blind. Bacha Rabbi Eliezer v'yomar, Soda Hashem li'reiv u'brisa lo dion. In other words, the secrets of the Torah are revealed to those who fear God. And what does that mean? That in this context, the Chachamim, based on their own understanding, their own Chachma V'das, they were Machavin, they came up with the same idea of the Takonas Anshe Knesset Gdolah. So the Kpeda, says Rashi, of Rabbi Eliezer was Sha'omar lo halacha yedua. There was a very well-known halacha, and it means that there's Meiser Ani during Shvius in Ammon and Moab. Kidvar chidush. He said it as if it was a new insight, and therefore the Talmidim of Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, and Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka, they were very hesitant to answer the question, Man is chadish v'beis hamedrash. They were afraid that maybe one of the things that they would tell Rabbi Yeshua would not be a chidush, and Rabbi Yeshua would be makpid on the fact that they were saying Dvar Torah as a Dvar chidush, just like Rabbi Eliezer was makpid on his Talmud Rabbi Yosef. Now, afterwards, they said to him, Talmidecha anu. In other words, whatever we have as a chidush is known to you. It's revealed to you. And he responded, nevertheless, please tell me. Once he responded, please tell me, then they're okay, they're relaxed. There's no makom for heck or kped. Even if they would say something to him which was well known and it's not a chidush. Now it's very strange because on the one hand, Rabbi Eliezer gets angry, if you will, and he's makpid on Rabbi Yossi. But on the other hand, he goes ahead and gives him a backhanded compliment by saying, Sod Hashem li'ireo. Hikshariaf in the Ein Yaakov, Me'achar shehikpid Rabbi Eliezer al advarim, Keitzad shibchan li'achar mikam v'yomer shehem nisod Hashem li'ireo. Ubir, Dili'achar shehenish es Rabbi Yossi, his yashva daito b'shibach dvora. Umishum kach af bocha al she'anisha. Omar lo. Rabbi Eliezer turned to Rabbi Yossi. He says, Lech and Morlahem, go into the base medrash and tell them, Al tachushu liminyanchem. Don't be inhibited and try to rescind that takana that you had taken a vote on and you established. You were mechavein to the real halach. And kach mekublani mirab yochanan ben Zakkai sheshoma mirabo v'rabo mirabo hilchas al Moshe misinai amon u'moav ma'asrin meiser ani b'shvius. So what do we have over here? We have a train of transmission, and it goes back to the Rebbe of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, that we paskin based on halacha l'Moshe misinai, that the Jewish nation, members of the Jewish community that live in Eretz Ammon, ma'asrim meiser ani b'shvius, which is exactly what Rabbi Yossi had said to his Rebbe, Rabbi Eliezer, was this Chadish Beis HaMedrash. But in fact, Rabbi Eliezer tells Rabbi Yossi that you should know that this is not totally in the Beis HaMedrash. I have a Kabbalah from my Rebbe, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, going back and back and back, that ma'asrin meiser ani b'shvius. Matam. So Rabbi Eliezer now explains why did they make this takana that those who live in Ammon and Moav are chayav in maser sheni b'shviyas, maser oni, b'shviyas, but not maser sheni. Why did they make such a takana? What's the logic that underlies this takana? And Harbe Krachim are large cities, Kavshu Ole Mitzrayim, when the Jewish people in the time of Yoshua came to conquer the land and to sanctify Eretz Yisrael with its Kedusha, V'lo kavshim oli bav. So there were areas within the bounds of Eretz Yisrael that were conquered at the time of Yoshua, and that's called Oli Mitzrayim. And those parts of the land were sanctified with Kedushas Eretz Yisrael. However, there were lands that, although they had been conquered by the Ole Mitzrayim, they were not sanctified by Ole Bavel. We're talking about during Ezra, Aliyah Shniya, the Ole Bavel, and included in those areas, those cities, the Krachim, that were not taken over by the Ole Bavel was Eretz Ammon Moab. So when Moshe Rabbeinu had taken the lands of Sichon v'Og, and those were the lands in that part of the Eivra Yarden, the other side of the Jordan, they were not conquered, these lands, by the Ole Bavel, only by the Ole Mitzrayim. And as a result, so the sanctification of Yoshua when he entered into Eretz Yisrael was only a temporary one, as long as the Jewish people were settled in the land. But after the exile, when the Churban Abayis took place, then there was Hafkas Kedusha, the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael, as far as Trumas of Maestros and Mitzvah Tulis Baretz, terminated when Bnei Yisrael went into Golus after the Churban Abayis Rishon, when they came later on in Aliyah at the time of Ezra to be Mekadish's second Kiddush. In Nichum, they left these cities out and they never sanctified them. And why? So that during Shvius, where in Eretz Yisrael, there would not be a chiyuv of Meiser Ani, because Hefker is part of a Meiser, but there's no Shvius and no sanctity to the land of Eretz, Ammon, Umoav, as a result of Kedusha Shni of Ezra. So that in the rest of Eretz Yisrael, when they didn't plant and they didn't harvest, the Aniyim did not have any parnosim. And even that which is Kodesh B'Kedusha Shvius is part of an Amaseh. So they left these Krachim out of the Kiddush process so that there wouldn't be Shemitah as a viable din and halach that would apply there in those areas. They could be Zoreah, they could be Kotzah B'Shvius. And from these gifts that the Aniyim would receive in the produce there in Ammon Moab, they would be able to support themselves and sustain themselves. So the real, shall we say, push or motivation of leaving these areas was the Tzarech Aniyim. And for sure, therefore, there would be a chiyuv Meiser Hani, in these areas. But this has nothing to do with Meiser Sheni. Meiser Sheni is a matter of taking it to Yerushalayim and eating Kedusha. So these Krachim, these cities on the other side of the Yarden, were potem and Torah from Trumas of Meisers. They were only Chayv Rabbanon, and therefore the Rishus of the Rabbanon, Heim Amru V'Heim Amru, was with their authority to determine which Meiser would be Noeg. And they determined that Meiser Ani would be Noeg and not Meiser Sheni. Tanu, we learned in a Bryce. So Liachach and Yashva Daito, when Rabbi Eliezer calmed down a little bit, Omar, he prayed to Hashem, Yirotzen Sheachziru Eine Yosi Limkomon, and there was a refuah, V'chazru Ein of Limkomon, and Rabbi Yossi's eyesight was restored. Now, we learned in the Mishnah back on Daf Beis that a shota is potter from Re'iyah because he's a lav bardas and he's potter for all mitzvahs. Tanu Rabbanan, Ezu shota, who qualifies and is categorized as a shota? He's potter from a mitzvahs, he's potter from onshim, he doesn't have kinyonim, he cannot sell, he cannot buy. It's hayota yechidi balayla. Number one, we have someone who goes outside in the public area at night, and he exposes himself to danger, and there's no yishuv over there, And that indicates that he's not working, as we would say, proverbially, with a full deck. Halon v'beis hakfar, somebody sleeps at night in a cemetery. Makareya al esksuso, he just rips his garments for no reason whatsoever. It's obvious, therefore, that he is a shoter. Now, these simonim are not limited, they're not restricted to these specific simonim. Anything that's similar to these simonim is also considered a shoter. And the Beis Yosef says that later on in the Gemara on Daf Dalid, we're going to add a fourth simon for a shoter. So that proves that this is not, an exclusive list of three. Now, what about someone who doesn't understand? He's simply intellectually limited. He has, what we call daito mishubeshes olav. And that's a case of a simple, straightforward shota. He's for sure pshita that he's potem in a mitzvah. That wouldn't be a chiddush. Even if you would teach him the mitzvahs, he doesn't understand them, he wouldn't be able to fulfill them. But we're dealing with someone who speaks, and we don't see any shibush b'daito. We just see the manifestation of these very strange behavior patterns. Some people who are socially lacking, emotionally retarded, so to speak. And Itmar, we learned to the base medrash with regard to Simoni Shota, Rav Huna Omar, Ashu Kulam B'Masach. You need all three Simonim. If he has only one or two of these Simonim, he's not a Shota. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Afilu B'Achas. Rabbi Yochanan disagrees. Any one of these three Simonim alone would be sufficient to give him the status of a Shota. The Gemara says, Hechi Dami, what's the case? If he's acting like a shota, and there's really no justification whatsoever for his behavior patterns, then afilu bechadanam. How do we understand Rav Huna? Rav Yochanan is absolutely right that one of these simonim is enough. Why would Rav Huna require all three simonim? But if he's not acting in what we would call derech hashotim, he has some sort of justification for his actions, then afilu kulanamilo, even if he had all these three simonim, it would not make him into a shotim. So the Gemara answers, Liolam tika avid lehu derech shtus. You're right. He's doing it in a way where there's no explanation, no justification. It's really derech shtus. It's stupidity, and it's only the action of an imbecile. But nevertheless, Rav Huna sells that it's not enough to have one simon, because if you only had one manifestation, one behavior pattern that's very strange, maybe there's some explanation for it. Maybe there's a reason for it. But halon v'beis hakfaros, and therefore, if someone sleeps in a cemetery, amor, perhaps kadesh tishol of ruach tuma hu deka'avid. Maybe he wants to communicate with the shadim that are in the lurking in the shadows in the cemetery, and they'll help him to do kishuv. And again, you're not allowed to do this, of course, but it's not a shota. For example, hayotzi ifidi balayla emur gante rifasachte. Maybe he had some sort of fever, and he went out to cool off in the night air. And even though it was not a good thing to do, he exposed himself to danger, but nevertheless, he was in that state of high fever. Maybe he's a person who's totally engrossed in his thoughts, and he's not really paying attention to the fact that he's ripping his garments. So maybe we should say he's not a shota. But even Kulu, once we see all these three abnormal, unusual behavior patterns, Havi lahu, and here we turn to Avdalid, Kimisha Gonach, Shar Chamor V'Gamal V'Nasamud L'Kol. It's like a shar that was nogeach, three different species of animals, and from now on, the Bailam will have to pay Nesek Shalom on any animal that it is nogeach, like a sharamua. It becomes a sharamua. Even though it was only nogeach each min once, and if, let's say, he was Nogech one specific min 3 times, he's only a muad for that min, but he doesn't have to be Nogech each of 3 minim 3 times, but rather if he's Nogech in 3 minim, 3 different species, 3 different categories of animals, we should say that he's a Nagchan for all animals. He's not makpid who he will attack. He's belligerent against all the minim. Any min, any animal that shows up, he'll attack them. And therefore, if he behaves and manifests in these 3 simoni shtus, then we're not going to assume that each one of his actions has another reason behind it that motivated it and that would, in a sense, explain it. But rather, we're going to say that they're all together an asiyah mishum shtus. He's all these 3 simonim are all 3 simone shtus. This is where we're going to stop here for now, even though we're in the middle of a sugya, but here on the top of Daf Dalid Amud Al.